This is gonna blow your mind. The air in the house crackled with unfairness. It was a modest home filled with the noise of 3 children. 2, a boy and a girl, lounged on plush furniture. They carelessly tossed popcorn, remnants of a movie marathon. Their laughter echoed, carefree and oblivious. Ethan's stepmother, Mrs. Agatha Finch, surveyed the scene with a critical eye. Her lips were pursed, a permanent fixture on her face. She believed in hard work, but only for some. Her own children, she reasoned, were destined for greater things. Ethan, she believed, was only useful for menial tasks. "Ethan, have you finished the dishes yet? And the laundry? There's always something that needs doing." Ethan straightened, his back aching. He looked at the mountain of chores still left, a testament to his step-siblings' laziness. The years tumbled by like a runaway wagon, each one carrying Ethan further into the depths of servitude. School became his only refuge, the one place he could escape the drudgery of the Finch household. He excelled in his studies, his mind sharp and hungry for knowledge.
What good is all that learning? It won't put dinner on the table.
Ethan, fetch my shawl. It's dreadfully chilly in here.
Their requests were endless, their gratitude non-existent. Ethan was their servant, not their brother. Despite the constant toil, Ethan found solace in his textbooks and the quiet moments stolen in the library. He dreamed of a different life, a life where he was defined by his own merits, not by the whims of his stepmother. He clung to education with the desperation of a drowning man clinging to a raft. One crisp autumn day, a letter arrived addressed to Ethan. It was a thick envelope, important looking, with a seal of a prestigious university. His heart pounded as he tore it open, his fingers trembling with anticipation. It was his acceptance letter, a full scholarship, a ticket to a brighter future. For the first time in a long time, hope bloomed in his chest, fragile yet tenacious. He knew his stepmother wouldn't be pleased. She saw education as a waste of time, a distraction from his chores. But for the first time in his life, Ethan felt a surge of defiance. Ethan's time at university was a revelation. He thrived in the academic environment, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. He excelled in his chosen field, computer science, his natural talent blossoming under the guidance of passionate professors. He was no longer the timid, put-upon stepson. He was Ethan, the scholar, the innovator, the one to watch. His scholarship money, carefully budgeted and stretched to its limits, was more than just financial aid. It was a symbol of his hard work, his resilience, his refusal to be defined by his past. He spent countless hours in the university's computer lab, his fingers flying across the keyboard, his mind ablaze with ideas. He coded late into the night, the soft glow of the monitor his only companion. He was developing an app, a revolutionary concept that had the potential to change the way people connect and communicate. He wasn't afraid to challenge conventional thinking, to push the boundaries of what was considered possible. News of Ethan's success reached the Finch household like a bitter wind.
But it's just luck.
I wonder if Ethan's newfound wealth means I can get a new wardrobe.
But it was their mother, Mrs. Agatha Finch, who felt the sting of Ethan's success most keenly. Her lips, usually pursed in disapproval, thinned to a tight line. Her eyes, cold and calculating, narrowed as she digested the news. She felt a surge of resentment, a bitter cocktail of envy and indignation. How dare he, the stepson she had relegated to the shadows, achieve such success? Her own children, her flesh and blood, were still floundering, their futures uncertain. Cedric, despite her best efforts, lacked ambition, content to drift from one menial job to another. Penelope, beautiful but vapid, seemed more interested in finding a wealthy suitor than forging her own path. The unfairness of it all gnawed at her. She deserved a share of his success, she reasoned, after all she had done for him. One sweltering summer afternoon, a dusty minivan pulled up in front of Ethan's newly purchased home. It was a modest but comfortable house, a testament to his hard work and determination. The lawn was neatly mowed, the flower beds blooming with vibrant color. It was his sanctuary, a far cry from the chaos of the Finch household. Ethan, surprised by the unexpected visit, answered the doorbell cautiously. His heart sank as he saw his stepmother, flanked by his step-siblings, standing on his doorstep. Their faces were grim, their expressions a mixture of expectation and entitlement.
Ethan, dear, we were in the neighborhood and thought we'd drop by. You have a lovely home.
She stepped inside, uninvited, her eyes scanning the tastefully decorated living room. Cedric and Penelope trailed behind her, their gazes greedy and possessive.
We've fallen on hard times, Ethan. Your father's investments haven't been doing well, and we've had to make some difficult decisions. We need a place to stay, Ethan. We have nowhere else to go.
Ethan's mind reeled. He had worked so hard to build a life for himself, to escape the shadow of his stepmother's control. And now, just as he thought he had finally broken free, they were back, their presence a suffocating weight on his chest.
Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation he knew was inevitable. He had spent years shrinking back, trying to appease his stepmother, but no more. He had found his voice, his strength, and he would not be silenced again. "This is my home, Mrs. Finch," he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his chest. He refused to call her mother, a title she had never earned. "I worked hard for this. This isn't a handout."
Don't be absurd, Ethan, she snapped. We're family. You have an obligation to help us.
"Family?" Ethan scoffed. "You haven't treated me like family for years. I was your servant, your scapegoat, the one you could always rely on to clean up your messes, both literally and figuratively."
Don't be dramatic, Ethan, Cedric interjected, his tone laced with boredom. We're just asking for a little help.
"A little help?" Ethan turned to his stepbrother, his gaze steady. "You've never lifted a finger to help yourself, Cedric. You've always expected everything to be handed to you. Well, life doesn't work that way."
Mrs. Finch's eyes narrowed, her lips thinning to a tight line.
You owe us, Ethan, Mrs. Finch hissed, her voice low and menacing. We raised you, clothed you, put a roof over your head. It's time you repaid that debt.
"I paid my debt," Ethan shot back, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "I paid it in sweat and tears, in years of servitude, in the constant fear of your disapproval. I owe you nothing."
He took a step back, putting distance between himself and his stepfamily. His heart pounded in his chest, a drumbeat of defiance. He was free, and he would not relinquish that freedom, not for them, not for anyone. The air crackled with tension. Years of resentment, of unspoken truths hung heavy in the air. Penelope, sensing the shift in power, fidgeted nervously, her gaze darting between her mother and Ethan.
"Get out," he said, his voice low but firm. "Get out of my house."
Mrs. Finch stared at Ethan, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and disbelief. She had never been challenged, never been denied. Her children, Cedric and Penelope, gaped at Ethan, their faces a mixture of shock and resentment.
You can't do this, Mrs. Finch sputtered. You're being ungrateful, Ethan. We're your family.
"Family," Ethan repeated, his voice filled with scorn. "Family doesn't treat each other this way. Family doesn't demand, they support. Family doesn't control, they encourage."
He pointed to the door.
"Get out," he repeated, his voice stronger this time. "And don't come back."
Mrs. Finch, realizing that her usual tactics were having no effect on Ethan, finally conceded defeat. With a huff of indignation, Mrs. Finch turned on her heel and swept out of the house, her children scrambling to follow behind her. The slam of the door echoed in the sudden silence, a final punctuation mark on a painful chapter of Ethan's life. Ethan stood there for a moment, his chest heaving, his mind racing. He had finally stood up for himself, had finally broken free from the chains of his past. A wave of relief washed over him, followed by a surge of pride. He had done it. He had won. As the dust settled and the echoes of the confrontation faded, Ethan took a deep breath and surveyed his home. It was his, earned through his own hard work and sacrifice. He had faced his demons, confronted his past, and emerged stronger, more determined than ever. He would not be defined by his stepfamily's greed or his stepmother's manipulation. He would forge his own path, build his own legacy, and create a life filled with joy, purpose, and authenticity.
He had learned the hard way that family wasn't defined by blood, but by love, respect, and mutual support. He thought about his friends, his colleagues, the people who had believed in him, encouraged him, and stood by him through thick and thin. They were his true family, the people who had helped him become the man he was today.
He looked out the window at the bright, sun-drenched world outside. It was a world filled with possibilities, opportunities, and adventures. And he was ready to embrace it all with open arms and a grateful heart. The future was his, and he would face it with courage, integrity, and the unshakable knowledge that he was worthy, he was capable, and he was free. Ethan had learned the hard way that family wasn't defined by blood, but by love, respect, and mutual support. He thought about his friends, his colleagues, the people who had believed in him, encouraged him, and stood by him through thick and thin. They were his true family, the people who had helped him become the man he was today. He looked out the window at the bright, sun-drenched world outside. It was a world filled with possibilities, opportunities, and adventures, and he was ready to embrace it all, with open arms and a grateful heart. The future was his, and he would face it with courage, integrity, and the unshakable knowledge that he was worthy, he was capable, and he was free. Ethan had learned the hard way that family wasn't defined by blood, but by love, respect, and mutual support. He thought about his friends, his colleagues, the people who had believed in him, encouraged him, and stood by him through thick and thin.